Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome John Quillay, Board of Directors for the U.S. Green Building Council.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Quillay, and I'm the Director and a Professor of Architecture at the University of New Mexico School of Architecture and Planning. And I'm also a member of the USGBC Board of Directors. It's a really wonderful experience to be having. I believe one of the reasons I've been asked to introduce our speaker this afternoon is because I also do design build of very small homes, high performance, and affordable housing. So today I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Sarah Susanka, a thought leader and renowned author, keynote speaker, and acclaimed architect. She originated the not-so-big philosophy of residential architecture, which aims to build better, not bigger. And we can all thank her for sparking the revolutionary small house movement, which at its core embodies Sarah's quality over quantity approach to design. She's the author of 9 books, which have sold over 1 million copies. That's pretty impressive. I think maybe I've sold 1,000 if I'm lucky. Collectively, they weave together home and life design, revealing that a not-so-big attitude serves not only architectural aims, but life goals as well. Through her not-so-big presentations and book series, she has helped readers understand that we feel most at home where we live when where we live reflects who we are in our hearts and when we fully inhabit each moment of our lives. You may have seen her work as a regular social commentator and trend spotter in USA Today, The Wall Street Journal, The New York Times. She's also contributed to magazines such as Better Homes and Gardens and Reader's Digest, and on television programs including Oprah and Good Morning America. And she's also appeared on CNN and HGTV. She's a member of the College of Fellows of the American Institute of Architects and a senior design fellow of the Design Futures Council and a USGBC Master Speaker, as you are aware of today. She's also received the Anne Morrow Lindbergh Prize for efforts in sustainability. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Sarah Susanka to the stage.
Thank you, John. Well, good afternoon. Are you fried yet? It's incredible. 4:30 yesterday, I was ready to hibernate, so I'm really impressed that there are this many people in the audience. You're willing to, welcome to yawn, stretch, whatever will help you to get a little bit of energy. What I want to talk about today, I am always excited when I'm talking to green conferences of one stripe or another, because I can take this message a lot further with this audience than I can typically. Before I start, how many of you, before seeing this on the program, were not familiar with the Not So Big House series? I've got a few, maybe 5 or so % of the audience. And how many of you are familiar with the Not So Big Life? Just a few. Okay, maybe another 5–10%. What I'm going to be doing over this coming hour is introducing you to not only just a taste of the Not So Big House, but much more into what I mean when I talk about the Not So Big Life and our Not So Big Planet. So what I do a lot of thinking about these days is how do we really start to live our own lives in a sustainable way, in a different way than most of what you are thinking. And so I'm going to give you a different way of looking at your individual lives with the hopes that you can take these home not only for yourselves, but to your communities and to the people that you work with, and rethink how you're going about your engagement with your everyday world. So I believe that sustainability starts with you, and so we'll take a look at what that means. If you're interested in the Not So Big House material, I have a lot of books. 8 of the 9 that are shown here are about the Not So Big House. As I said, I'm not going to go in depth today, but I'm going to just give you a taste with the next few slides. So what do I mean by not so big? The thing that started this movement was that I was a residential architect And I noticed that everybody who came into my office wanting to have me design them a house or remodel were looking for a beautiful house. They had lots of wonderful pictures, but when they told me the square footage that they needed, I realized before I even had them as a client that there was no way that I could help them. In other words, the square footage they were asking for would be absolute bare bones given the budget that they were telling me they had available. So I had to figure out a way, how do I tell people how to get a better house, but actually a smaller house? And so over the years, I got pretty good at telling this story, and I had thousands and thousands of clients over 15 years, and I got really, really, really tired as you guys are right now, of sitting in seminars, telling the same story. And so I figured, well, I'll put it into a book. And so that's what really spurred the Not So Big House. I knew there were a lot of people in Minneapolis and St. Paul, where I lived at the time, that were interested in the message, but I had no idea what was going to happen. In fact, that first book changed my life completely, and I'll tell you more of that story in a little bit. But the thing that really blew me away was how many people, when they saw just the title, The Not So Big House, said, that's what I want. I don't want a big house. I want a better house. How do I do that? And so I literally got thousands and thousands of emails from people saying, you've put into words what it is that I'm really looking for. Thank you so much. What I knew, though, was that that message could go further. And so the series of books that have come since then have really been an evolution of this set of ideas. But I mentioned that really at the core of the Not So Big message is one of sustainability. And I'm going to use this. I'm sure there's not a person in this room who doesn't see this quote 2 or 3 times a day at this point. But Gandhi, who is famous for having said, we must be the change we wish to see in the world. And I want to give you a new way of looking at that message. It works at the level of house design, but it also works at the level of how we live our lives. And so that's what I'm going to just introduce you to. All of us, in our heart of hearts, are searching for home. We search for it with a structure that we feel at home in, but we also search to be at home in our lives. And so how do we do that? We got an idea of how to do it, and we sort of share that with each other, and depending upon the circles you turn in, you know what's going to make you feel good in your life. But there's more to it, too, is how do we feel at home, at one with this planet? And I think a lot of what I've heard over the last couple of days is really that struggle to understand this is our home, and how do we be at home and sustainably living on this planet in a way that nurtures both and all. And so that's really where we're going with this message today. In terms of house design, it's about making a house that really is tailored for today's lifestyle, which is much more informal than the way that we lived when we were designing formal living rooms and formal dining rooms, which in the vast majority of houses sit empty if you have a family room, which is where most people do their living these days. And even if you've got a much smaller structure, you can design it so that it feels larger than it actually is. And so a lot of what I talk about in the Not So Big House series has to do with that shaping of space to make less feel like more. But at their core, they're built better rather than bigger. They're built to last, and they're built to inspire. That inspiration part is incredibly important. And they're also built for the way we really live. I've been a big advocate for getting rid of the dining room because so many people don't use them. And the formal living room, I think at this point, in many, many houses, is a thing of the past. That wasn't true when I wrote these books in 1998, when this one came out. And I could watch, I knew the Minneapolis and St. Paul market the best, and so I could watch as living rooms sort of bit the dust and dining rooms started to do double duty, both for formal and informal functions. So it's happening, but it takes time. In time, it takes time. One question that I get asked very frequently is, how big is not so big? And in the name itself is a paradox, because it paradoxically is not about the specific size, it's about an attitude. So I tell people, what I'm going to show you how to do is build about 1/3 less square footage than you thought you needed, and put the dollars you have available into making the square footage you do build really beautiful and really work for everyday life. And so whether it's a Katrina cottage like the top left-hand picture, or whether it's a house like the one on bottom left, bottom right, I'm sorry, which I did as a show house in Orlando a few years ago, in fact, with partners who I believe are in the audience today. And that one is probably closer to 2,800 square feet. So all of these fit the ideas because it's designed so that every square foot is in use every day. And that's really the core. And there are people who've been attracted to this message from all walks of life, people who wouldn't think of living in more than 650 square feet, and people who can't think of living in less than 5,000. So it stretches across a very wide range of people and issues and interests. In terms of remodeling, there's also an attitude that I realized needed changing. This book actually came out in 2007, poor timing in terms of the recession, but it's chock full of ways to help you think through how to actually not even add on, but rethink how you're using the space within the house. And then only consider a bump out or a small addition if you can't rearrange that space first. So it's all about economy and about thinking through how to make less do more. And that's really the core of this message in all the different avenues. But one of the central theses, and I think one that often gets missed, is that we human beings are a core part of the sustainability message. If we don't find something beautiful, we don't look after it. And so I believe that beauty matters very much. You can have a house that's called very green, but if it's not lovely, if it doesn't make you want to look after it, I would suggest that that is not sustainable, because we're not going to be looking after it for years and years. Think about the bungalows of 100 years ago. The reason that they have such value is because they were beautifully designed and we look after them. So it's really a core feature of the sustainability message. I also have in recent years been talking a lot about community design. And there's obviously an enormous amount of wonderful work going on in the world. Many of you are doing it. There's a book that I am hoping to write in the near future about the Not So Big movement. And one of the core parts of this is Not So Big community. We have pocket neighborhoods, the book I show here by Ross Chapin. If you don't know it, you need it. It's a wonderful, wonderful book about how to create small pocket communities, whether it's new construction or in your existing neighborhood. The New Urbanism has done amazing work, and all the work on walkable communities and complete streets and all the things that are going on in thinking about how to make vital neighborhoods and communities is incredibly important for what we're leaving as a legacy for future generations. I grew up in England, as some of you may be able to tell by my ever so slightly leftover accent. And I can tell you that the community was an enormously important part of my life. You know, just to be able to walk everywhere, to know everyone. It's a whole different thing. When I moved to the LA suburbs at 14 in 1971, I thought, where are the people? I knew something was wrong, and I, in a way, knew that that was going to be my life's calling, was to look at how do we make this better? How do we do this, what was at the time suburbia, in a better way? So there's a lot more that I could talk about this, but today we're going to move into a different not-so-big avenue, our not-so-big planet. All of us are looking at how do we take care of this incredible resource that we have. This, I think, is one of the most beautiful pictures. I found it from NASA a few days ago. I just think it's an incredible, and you can feel just the gentle swath of our atmosphere around the Earth's surface. But here we are human beings, and we have this enormous drive to succeed. And we do it in all sorts of different ways. The people in this conference are doing it in a way where they hope it's also supporting the planet. But not all human beings are oriented that way. So how do we reach our full potential? How do we do that? And that's really where my journey started. I started to recognize that I was in a cage of my own creation when I was working as an architect in Minneapolis and St. Paul. Like I said, how many of you feel too busy in your lives? Yeah. I surely did. I couldn't imagine how I could find time to do what I really wanted to do tremendously, which was write. I loved writing. I had these two dual interests, writing and architecture. And architecture won out initially because my dad had told me he wasn't going to pay for me to go to writing school. I got accepted at UC Santa Cruz, and he said, mm-mm. So although I was really pissed at the time, it was probably a very powerful choice that got made for me then. But 20 years later, there I was working away in my very successful architecture firm, doing a lot of wonderful work, but I knew that I had an answer for all those huge houses that were being built. I knew that I knew a better way. I had heard so many of my clients come in and say, we've built 4 houses, and we thought each one was going to be our dream home, and none of them was what we wanted. How did that happen? Well, I knew, because I saw that when people were asking for square footage and rooms, they weren't describing what they really wanted, which was the feeling of home. And there's a way to do that that is very different than what we normally have in our conventional world. And that's what all the not-so-big house books are about. But in order to start writing, I had to make some major changes. And so I started on a journey of inner work to look at how have I created this too busy world? How did I do this? And how can I get out of it? And it became pretty clear to me that I could only do one thing. I could change my schedule, and I could make time to write. And I actually gave myself a project number, like giving a new client a project number, and pasted myself into my calendar because that's the only way I knew how to make time. But that struggle, which, believe me, I still struggle with today, but I have a calmer life than I used to, started a shift, and it started me on a journey to be able to do what I knew in my heart of hearts is what I was here for. So it didn't require that I threw the baby out with the bathwater. It took 2 hours on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, and everything else has happened as a result of that minor shift. One of the things that we very often believe is that we've got to start over if we want to do something different. And what I realized in that moment was it really requires just a very small shift, just a commitment to start doing the thing that you love, and that will change everything. So I was seeing that it's not just houses that were too big. I was actually living a too big life. I was living in a way that was unsustainable. I was exhausted, and I knew that I would burn myself out. And I also knew that if I didn't make that change, nothing was going to change until I retired. And of course, architects don't retire, so I would probably go to my grave working too hard. So it made me really rethink. And I could see how in the world I lived in, a lot of my friends were in the same boat. So I started to recognize, in the same way that I'd written about house design, there was something to be said about life design. And so in 2007, I came out with this book, The Not So Big Life, which takes the metaphor of a house remodeling, but then superimposes it upon our lives. So at the time, I was not totally thrilled with this idea of using the metaphor of house design. How many of you have read The Not So Big Life? There were a lot of people that told me that was actually the thing that helped them to be able to read the book, because they probably wouldn't have read a book about how to design a life. But when they started to see the architectural metaphor, like getting rid of extra stuff, opening some walls between rooms, we can take that metaphor and bring it into our lives and see how we segregate our lives into who we are at work and who we are at home and who we are with our children. And they're different segmented worlds where we really don't have a sense of vitality and interconnection between them. So The Not So Big Life is really the story of how I came to do any of this work, really how I started to live a sustainable life. And the reason I wanted to put it down is because so many of us in our culture today need some way of learning how to take these steps more consciously. It's a very simple idea, and I know in this audience, you're much more aware already of the imbalances. But the struggle of how to bring things into balance is enormous. We have so many things pinging us and distractions. I mean, I noticed myself, I'm sitting in a session and I'm tweeting and then I'm thinking, what am I doing? I want to be here, I want to listen. You know, so it's not that tweeting is bad and listening is the right thing, but it's just to see how we distract ourselves in our lives so easily, so completely. And really at the core of this message of the Not So Big Life is to learn how to look at everything with the eyes of a student. Because when you do, every single thing can teach you. And I'm talking about teaching you in a way that I'm going to try to give you just a taste of. I don't have a lot of minutes today to do it, so this will be just a dip in the pond, but there's a lot more to this. Most of us have seen The Matrix, and in a way, where we're going from this point on in my talk is like when Morpheus asks Neo, you want the red pill or you want the blue pill? The blue pill, you can stay asleep, you can keep doing what you're doing, and you can live out the rest of your days, no problem, as though everything here is completely real, solid, you know it, you understand it. The red pill, take the red pill, and everything changes, and we start to see how the illusion of this cage of our own creation was made. And that's really what I'm interested in these days, and what I'm trying to help people to understand, because I believe that it is truly the way to a sustainable planet. So things in our world are not in any way, as I know, the way that they appear. Everything is like a cover. I call it the content of life, but there's something much deeper going on underneath. So what I'm going to try to give you a taste of is how to get at that stuff that's underneath the content. And I want to just show you a couple of images to give you a sense of what I'm talking about. When you see this sculpture, there is no way, you would say, that there's any order in that sculpture. And yet you look at the shadow that is created by pointing the light in one particular direction, and you find its order. This is how we need to start looking at our lives, because it looks so chaotic. All the stuff that we're doing seems so completely, sometimes I can imagine coming to a conference like this, you could be inspired, but you could also be completely overwhelmed. And I've been to a couple of sessions where I go, well, I can imagine thinking, well, what's the point? What's my effort going to do? But yet underneath that surface, underneath that sculpture, there's something vastly more important going on, in which we all play a huge part. Here's another one I love. These are two shadows of one object taken from different angles. You would say absolutely when you look at those two shadows that they are of different objects, and yet that is the same structure. So, many of you have heard the story of we're all describing the elephant, but from our particular location. Somebody's holding the tail, somebody's holding an ear, and that elephant doesn't sound like anything like the same thing. And yet when we learn how to listen to each other's messages, we start to understand that we're seeing something vastly more. I've been fortunate enough in the last few years to be in a position to be hearing all those stories and seeing the vastly more part. And that's what I want to convey. Let's look at another couple of perspectives. Some of you have seen graphs like this where you're looking at the history of the Earth in terms of a 12-hour clock. And in terms of the impact that human beings have had on the geology of our planet, it's less than 1/10 of a second of that 12-hour day. So just to put things into perspective, we perceive ourselves as being this enormously important part of what's going on, which in this moment we are. But in terms of the history of the planet, we're less than a blip. So I'm just trying to give you a sense of where we stand in the big geological picture of the universe and of our planet. And then in terms of what we see things and we think that's it. But we are only seeing 1/10 of a billionth of the spectrum, the electromagnetic spectrum. Everything else goes through us, it's permeating us, but we don't see it, so we don't believe it's there. 1/10 of 1 billionth. So we've got this incredible role to play. We are an absolutely integral part of this play, and yet what we think we see with our eyes is so limited compared to what's actually happening. So as an architect, I tend to think about everything in terms of dimensions. So we work on a regular basis with length and height and width, the 3 dimensions that we're familiar with. But there are more dimensions, and I don't know if anybody has seen Brian Greene's Fabric of the Universe, Fabric of the Cosmos, but if you're looking for something to really expand your imagination about what's going on here in terms of time and space, that series is excellent, Fabric of the Cosmos. But there are other dimensions, and that's what intrigues me. And the part of that dimensional system that has been the most intriguing to me is the next dimension up. Einstein has told us very clearly we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking that we used to create them. So we have to bump up to the next dimension, a dimension beyond what we take as this substantive reality, in order to be able to start to see what's really going on. And the next dimension, as far as we're concerned, is time. Now, I have to tell you a little piece about time before I go on here. Time to us is something we were born and we die, and between that there are a series of moments, and all of those go along linearly. They're only linear because we are not fully inhabiting the 4th dimension. We can't. That's really literally what our physical bodies don't let us. But if we were 5th dimensional creatures, we would be able to see the 4th dimension like we can see the 3rd dimension. And so for a 5th dimensional creature, the 4th dimension, time, is an object, not a linearity. I know we're taking a big shift here, but I just want to get you thinking outside the box of what we think time is. And so this is our best guess at what the 4th dimensional cube looks like. And I can tell you 100% this is not it. But this is our effort to animate what we call a hypercube, which is the next 90-degree angle from the cube. We've taken a plane, we've then made a cube, and then we go to the next dimension, and we end up with a hypercube. But what that means in terms of our lives, we can't see it. This is where our senses can't take us to the next dimension. But we can start to see some things in our own lives. And so this is a graphic that's going around on Facebook and various other media right now, which is helping us to just think outside the box of what we think time is. So the top picture is our notion. Here we've got the present, right here, and then we've got the past, and then we've got the future. And it's a linear idea. What you can start to experience when you really pay attention to your life is that things that happen today actually were the result of that thing that you're doing today actually was apparent when you were much younger. I know this sounds weird. I have had so many of these experiences myself, and I'm going to tell you one of them so that you just get a taste of what I'm talking about. I love movies that have an esoteric bent. And so I'll tell you about, we talked about The Matrix, and we'll talk about a couple of others before the end of this. But there's a movie called Mr. Nobody. If you haven't seen it, it's a must. It's incredible. It will make your mind start to grapple with this issue about time. But in that movie, there was a scene that knocked my socks off. And I'll tell you why. When I was 15 years old, I wrote a story called Harlequinade. And I don't know if any of you have seen that Picasso picture where he's got a little boy sitting in a harlequin costume looking quite sad. Well, I had told a story about that child as a wisdom font. And he was standing on a stage talking to me in an empty audience, and I was the only one in that audience. So there I was, sitting in the audience and listening to this child It was a story. I made it up. So in Mr. Nobody, there is a child looking just like that Picasso picture, sitting in an empty audience, and he's watching what's going on the stage. And you can feel the parallel between those two situations. And just in case I didn't get the point, there's one scene in Mr. Nobody where everybody is wearing Argyle-patterned sweaters, which is the Harlequin pattern. It gave me goosebumps because I could see that here was something from the past I could not possibly have known about this movie, but it was teaching me in that moment that time is not what you think it is. Now, you'll have to find your own examples. I'm sure there are people in here saying, well, that's crazy. This is really far out. But if you can just ask the question rather than poo-poo it, you'll start to see that there are synchronous happenings all the time. And when we understand that we're limited in our understanding of dimension, if a drop of water drips into a pond, we understand that the ripples go in all directions. When we are living on flat land, which is the equivalent of what we would be living in if we were a higher dimensional creature, we would be able to see that the patterns that come from that drop on the water go in this direction, this direction, this direction, and this direction. But we don't know it because we're limited to our linear experience. So I'm saying this and giving just a little bit of time to it because when you start to grasp this, you'll see that things can shift in ways you cannot imagine when you're stuck on the linear time notion. So just give it a little bit of thought, a little bit of possibility. The other piece about time, and we hear this all the time these days, is that there is only one true, real time, and that is right now. And right now. And right now. And everything else, literally everything else, we are either remembering or we're projecting into the future and imagining. But they are not here and now. So there is a literal way that you can understand this where time is simply a line of nows. And the only place that anything can happen is in this now. So that starts to, this was really what happened for me when I had that epiphany and realized I had to find time in my calendar. I realized, you know, I can keep waiting a year or another year, wait till I retire to do what I want to do. But the only moment of action is now. And so for people in your worlds, many of you are taking very important actions, but make sure it's coincident with what you really long to do, because that's where the point of action really is, the root of what's needed is coming through you. When you're present in something, a message can be spread in a way that you can't imagine. I honestly think that's what happened with writing the Not So Big House. I still can't fathom how it got read by as many people as it did. But I think it was because of that passion to want to say it. And it's got a kind of viral, its own viral pattern that gets spread when that happens. And all of you in this room have that capacity. So this is all a setup for a bigger understanding, which some of you, if you've done any esoteric studies, you may begin to understand what I'm talking about here. But this that we're living is our collective waking dream. So we are literally dreaming this world into existence, and we can change it faster than you can imagine when we all show up right now. So really, I think a lot of what's happening in our culture is that we're starting to understand the importance of being in the moment. And believe me, I've talked to audiences of builders and people you wouldn't think would sit still. One realty company told me that she thought maybe the audience would not stay and not to worry if everybody left. But people are interested. They get it. There's something important going on here. And we can start to show up in this waking dream Like lucid dreaming, any of you who have been aware in your dreams, you may know that you can actually alter what's happening in the dream because you pop awake within the dream. We can do that right here, right now, in this shared waking dream. That's a big idea. It's so far out of what I can normally speak to an average audience that I realize I'm on the fringe, but it's a really, really important idea. So a part that I've been trying to help people grasp is that everything that we experience in our lives is a kind of reflection. And so as we, instead of arguing with our world, instead ask, so what is this in my life to show me? It changes the whole picture because now you're receptive. You're looking at what can I learn? You're looking with the eyes of a student. There's a whole lot more I can say about this. I've got hundreds of stories of how you can become aware within each moment. I want to give you an assignment. The next time you have this feeling of reaction inside you, this shouldn't be happening, drop the reaction for just a second and say, if this were here as food for me, rather than just to get me pissed off, what might it be teaching me? That's a huge, huge lesson if you can do it. I've told several in the Not So Big Life, but the one that was really powerful for me was where one of my associates was really upset with me because she felt I wasn't giving credit to the people in our firm enough, and that I was stealing her ideas, and everything I did to try to make that situation better made it worse. And this went on for 18 months. It was really, I know all of us have been through these things in our lives where we just can't fix it. And I had started to work with a teacher at the time, a spiritual teacher, and she said, you're not going to be able to convince her that you're trustworthy. Drop it. How can I do that? My whole heart and soul was involved in it. I had an identity as a trustworthy person. But when I actually let myself feel what was going on there, and then worked a little bit more on feeling my own anger at what she was saying, that's why that was in my life. I needed to feel the inauthenticity of continuously being nice to her. I was pissed, but I didn't know it. It wasn't okay to be pissed in my family. So I had to learn that this is okay to feel this and be able to speak authentically, not to beat her over the head, but to say, why would you distrust me? What is it that I've done? Tell me. Just speak to her honestly about what was going on inside me. So many of our misunderstandings and disagreements are because we're being shown something about ourselves and we keep seeing it as out there. So this is what we're really being taught, that world out there is really ourselves. And just like when you have a toddler who's learning that image in the mirror is themselves, we are starting to learn that the whole world is reflecting us back to us. And I would argue that's true for the planet, too. Now, that's a big leap, and I know there are people in here who are going to say, whoa. But just think about it for a second. Think of the amount of imbalance in our lives. Think about all the things that we are working with on ourselves, and then look at the parallel in what we see in what the planet's going through. If we can change our worlds, and if we can help others to do the same because we are doing it ourselves, shift can happen in an incredibly fast rate because it's a reflection. A mirror doesn't stop and think about whether it's going to reflect. It just reflects. And that's what I believe is going on here. So there's a lot of incredible work going on in the movies these days related to dream. One of my favorites is the movie Inception. How many people have seen Inception? Another one for your list if you haven't seen it. And if you have seen it, watch it 2 or 3 more times. Because it is really, really a powerful movie in understanding how we are in this world and how our dreams are inhabited by each other. We're each living parts of each other's dreams. And each dream, each one of us, is seeding an idea in others' dreams. I am right now seeding an idea in your waking dreams. And in fact, in Inception, the seeding of the idea that really is the root of the whole story is that this world is an illusion. It's a dream. So right here in our waking dream, I have a movie that's here to help me point out something that I want to say. That's how it works. So sometimes, actually many times, life is about risking everything for a dream that no one else can see but you. I know you know what you're talking about because many of you are living that reality. But that's what I'm doing right here, is I want to give a sense that there's something more beyond the content of this dream that we can shift by shifting ourselves. And so one of the core notions of this has to do with what we focus upon. What I would like to ask each of you to do is to focus on what you want, not what you don't want. When we focus on what we don't want, we're fighting, and what we bring into our world is fighting. When we focus upon what we do want, what we bring into the world is more of what we do want. I saw a very powerful interview last night on CNN from a couple who had been in that theater in Paris. And the young woman, who's 22 years old, was describing to Anderson Cooper what she felt. And she said so eloquently, I want to focus on all the people who helped the guy who saved my life by sitting on top of me so that I couldn't jump up and scream. All those acts powerfully affected her. And when he asked her what she thought about the terrorists, she said, I don't want to go there. I don't want to focus on that. I want to focus on what was really life-changing for me in that moment. That's what I'm talking about. Because you can fall into the pits of despair. We can look at some of the things that we know about this planet, and we can feel completely overwhelmed. But if you keep looking at, it's never going to work, what am I doing? It's a waste of time. Any of those thoughts are going to start you living that dream. Our thoughts are the architects of our world. So focus on what you want to accomplish, want to see in your own life and in the planet that you live on. And you'll find, as you are finding, that things shift in ways you can't imagine. The other really important thing is to realize that when shit falls on you, it's not shit, it's fertilizer. This is actually a quote from one of my favorite teachers, Ron Mangrovite, and he had a way of putting things into perspective, and this one is really, really important. If you can realize that the stuff that you really wish would go away is actually here for your growth, like that story I told you about my friend, now friend, so that you can understand why it's here. It's absolutely all for our growth. So look beyond the illusion and see what's here for you. See what's here for all of us when we can start to see beyond that surface, to go back to that early image of the sculpture where we saw a chaotic image, but looked from the appropriate orientation, you see incredible order. All of this has order. So I know most of you have seen these, but it's in this moment will probably carry more punch. Just look at things in perspective in terms of scale. So here we have the planets that are smaller than ours and Earth. Here we have the planets that are larger than Earth, along with the ones that are smaller than Earth. Earth is now that one bottom left. Remember, we live on this. I said the other day, we are as much a part of this planet as the mold is on blue cheese. And you can feel it right here. Now we're barely visible. That's our sun. Now we are not invisible, and our sun is tiny. And now our sun is invisible, and we're looking at the 15th brightest star in our sky. And there are videos today online where you can see the other 15, and they dwarf Antares in the same way. So here we are on this tiny pinprick in the relative scale of the universe, and we think we're in control. We are not controlling this. We're a part of it, an important part. How many of you have read Paul Hawken's Blessed Unrest? If you haven't read it, it's a fantastic book. But he suggests that all the organizations, like all the ones represented in this room today, are really the immune system of the planet. We're doing what's needed. We are shifting things because that's what's needed. And each of us thinks that we are in control of making it happen. We are being moved. And so as you start to see the part you're playing, you realize that as that integral part of the planet, when your heart longs to do something, pay attention, because that is actually the planet asking you to do something. You're not separate from it. There's no accident that the letters in the word heart and the letters in the word earth are the same. It's the same thing. We are completely connected. And so when you pay attention, you start to play the part that you were meant to play. One other little piece related to this, if you think about the word emergency and just look at the root of the word, within emergency is emergence. There's something far bigger going on here than we can know. It doesn't mean that we don't have to act as though it's an emergency. It doesn't mean that we don't have to take the actions that we feel drawn to do. But we need to, just like I said, when something bad happens in your world, ask, what could this be here to show me? I think as a planet, we are being asked to look at the possibilities for what else this can be showing us. We may be helping to stop a tipping point that can bring us back from a precipice, or we could be birthing into something completely different that we cannot even imagine. All we can do is be present in our engagements and to do what we do completely and with wholeheartedness. It's the wholeheartedness, the presence in it, that's the transformative element. And so as Marianne Williamson says, a miracle is a shift in perception from fear to love. So as we shift from fear of all the bad things that could happen to what is the possibility for this planet and for our species and all the species upon this planet, we have an incredibly capable imagining. We can imagine something vastly more, and in that imagining, shift happens. All of you know that. You've seen it with all the work that you've done. But that's what I believe we are bringing into this world. So the real core of Not So Big Living is to learn how to be in your doing. And when you do that, when you simply show up completely in what you're doing, things slow down. I'm living it. I used to be that crazy busy. I still do a lot of things, but I don't feel crazy busy anymore in the same way. And when I do, I know that I have to sit down, go for a walk, just stop doing whatever it is that I'm doing. The part of me that says I've got to keep going faster and faster and faster is not correct. So for all of us, we need to notice what are the patterns in our own lives that keep us from being in our doing, and move towards that being part, because it is the most valuable medicine that can possibly be given this planet. And ultimately, our lives are simply the experiencing of what's here. So whatever is happening, however you don't like what's happening, if you can let go of the ideas of how it's supposed to be, especially in those really, really difficult moments, and just be there, experience what's happening. There's a great phrase I often tell people, if you're very sad or you're very frustrated, instead of saying, I'm frustrated, say frustration is happening. Because it depersonalizes it, and it allows you to experience, this is the experience of this moment, frustration. We have incredibly rich lives. When we can actually show up in the moment, we experience it. If we don't show up, we miss it. Another movie, any of you that have seen Click, you fast forward through life, you miss it completely. That's what a lot of us are doing. So I want to leave you today with just the thought of what is it that really inspires you, and to place your focus there. It doesn't have to be a way that you make a living. It can be something completely ridiculous. It might be something that you say, you know, I don't understand, how can this possibly help the world? Let that go. Just do it. I couldn't possibly have dreamed how writing a book would cause millions of people to change the houses that they built. I wasn't thinking that scale at all. I was thinking about how to help my colleagues to stop having to say the same thing to their clients every day. But when you move with that heart, that is the bridge to a sustainable future. That's how we move this world, this waking dream, into something glorious rather than something frenzied and degrading. And so I believe that this is what Gandhi was really telling us, that the only way to change the world is to change ourselves. And it's important to explain how that story came to be. He was with a big crowd of people, and they would bring their questions to him. And a woman brought her young son, who was very overweight, to Gandhi, and she asked Gandhi, would you tell my son to stop eating all this sugar, because, you know, it's really bad for him, I don't know what to do. And Gandhi looked at the little boy, looked back at the mother, and said, ma'am, I'd like you to bring him back in a week. And she shrugged and said, okay. And she walked away, dutifully came back a week later. Same scene. Gandhi said to the little boy, son, I want you to stop eating all those sweets and candy. They're not good for you. And then the mother looked back at Gandhi and she said, sir, it's kind of you to say this to him. I really appreciate it, but why couldn't you have said it to him last week? And he said, madam, a week ago, I did not know if I myself could stop eating sweets and candy. We must be the change we wish to see in the world. Now, he is telling an immense truth. That is that you can speak the same words as somebody else, but if you are not living it, it cannot possibly change their world. Why? Because this is a reflection. So if you want to change the world, you have to live it yourself. And as you change, the world changes with you because it's reflecting you back to you. That's the truth that Gandhi was speaking. And that's what all of us in this incredible movement really need to understand. Bring your life into balance. And as we change, the world will change with us. Thank you so much. I know that was heady stuff, but I'm happy to answer questions about anything, including houses, tiny houses, you name it. Anybody have any questions? I've stunned you all. Well, I really appreciate all of your, oh, yes, sir, yeah. Oh, yes. The question is, how do I feel about building new versus renovating? I think both have a place and both are important. I live in a house that I remodeled in order to write Not So Big Remodeling, and I'm still frustrated that it's not as energy efficient as a new house. But as I say in that book, I've done a lot of things to the house to make it better, and if I had moved and built myself a new house, that house would still be leaking. So I try to help people see that looking after our existing housing stock and making those houses better, even if they're not up to a net zero standard, it's still a very, very good thing that's happening. A huge amount of our carbon emissions come from, 21% come from our existing housing stock, pre-83, I think they say. So it's a very important part of our work. It's hard to see with the lights. Any other questions? Well, go, yeah.
I'm fascinated with the new ideas you presented to me, and I'm struggling, if I'm the creator of my own dreams, and the people around me are, how do you handle the conflict when dreams are fighting each other?
I'm being told to remind you to use the microphone. Can you do that? Because otherwise a lot of people can't hear. Sorry.
Sorry, I forgot it was back.
Yeah.
I'm struggling with, understanding my own place in the world and the dreams that I've created. And when they're in conflict with the dreams that others have created for themselves, how do you reconcile that in a very positive way?
You can't. The big part about this is you are going to find in the world diametrically opposite attitudes. That's part of the mirror, actually. The more firmly you are fighting for one side, you will see the opposite side reflected. But stay with what you believe, what you are doing. You can't fix them, but you can surely do what you're doing and do it really well. Sometimes in our lives, if we find that over and over again we're at odds with someone, you might want to turn it around and say, so what's this here to show me? And sometimes you're too far on one end to be able to talk to the other end. So, instead of calling my first book the Small House Book, by calling it the Not So Big House Book, I was able to speak to people who were building very large houses because it wasn't as scary as small. Well, I thank you all for your attention, and I hope you'll take this message into your lives, into your worlds, and let me know what happens. You can incidentally, I have bookmarks down here on the stage with contact information and all sorts of other stuff. So thank you for your attention. You're a wonderful audience.